T-minus 10 seconds.
You're listening to News and Movies Radio. newsandmoviesradio.com. Where the world comes to listen.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
Welcome. You're listening to News and Movies Radio, broadcasted live around the world. Today we'll be talking with horror science fiction memorabilia collector Jim Gresham on collecting movie posters and lobby cards, and learn more about his latest hardcover movie poster book, What Music They Make. Stay tuned. You're listening to News and Movies Radio, newsandmoviesradio.com.
For the absolute finest in vintage movie memorabilia, look no further than BuyMoviePostersInc.com. Buy Movie Posters Inc. features an incredible selection of hand-picked original movie posters, lobby cards, and stills from all over the world, with titles from the classic era of Hollywood to the present. Browse our online gallery and email us your want lists as we scour the globe for more hidden treasures. Also, Buy Movie Posters Inc. is always looking to buy quality movie memorabilia. If you have movie material that you'd like to sell outright or consign, email us at buymovieposters@gmail.com. You won't be disappointed.
Welcome back. My guest on the show today is author and movie memorabilia collector Jim Gresham. Jim recently completed his third hardcover book on his horror science fiction book series, What Music They Make, a comprehensive guide to horror posters. The 320-page tome contains over 1,500 all-new images of original horror posters and lobby cards from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Jim, welcome to News and Movies Radio.
Thank you, Andrew. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you. There's probably not a nicer, more resourceful guy out there in movie memorabilia collecting than Jim Gresham, and I know you and I have done some deals together over the years. It's always good catching up with you. Thanks for agreeing to do this.
Well, I'm excited. I don't know about how nice, but yeah, I've enjoyed our deals, and I've enjoyed being friends with you for many years.
So you own a snowplow business, and you've got a large fleet of trucks. Are you all preparing for a heavy winter this year?
We are right now, this very minute, working on tuning up our trucks and lining up contracts. We snowplow commercial accounts in the northern suburbs of Detroit.
Okay, so I imagine, do you do the Detroit Lions and the Red Wings, and I guess the Tigers aren't in the Fall Classic this year. Do you do those as well?
You know, those are downtown Detroit, and we kind of don't go that far south. We do a little bit, but we plow things like all the Rite Aid drugstores, shopping centers, large churches, office buildings. That's the sort of thing we do. We don't do homes. We do commercial accounts.
Okay, cool. And a lot of people think of Michigan, as just being this cold place, this frozen tundra year-round, but you guys have the Great Lakes, and the summers are really quite nice and temperate.
I love Michigan. I love the four seasons. The snowplow season is just bad enough that businesses have to take care of it and have to line people up, but it's not horrible, So from about December 15th through March 15th is our real winter, and it's pretty tolerable, really.
Nice. So fans listening out there are probably wanting us to jump right in and talk about your new book and poster collecting. So how did you get started in the hobby? You mentioned in a previous interview where it started out as baseball cards, evolved into a Euro model kits, and then into vinyl records. How did you finally settle on horror posters?
Well, I always have been a collector. I did do the Aurora model kits, and I remember as a child being in my mom and dad's basement doing that and listening to the Beatles on the radio. It's a great memory, and And I collected baseball cards. I collected records. My mother always said, don't waste your money on those. Well, I still have 3,545 records.
Wow.
So, yeah, I've got old cards. So, I think common to most of us, we have those tendencies to be collectors. So most of the people in the poster hobby are collectors. And I didn't mean to be a collector. I've really gone overboard on it, but it started back in the 80s. We had a 1950s basement. We had a jukebox and a Coke machine and some memorabilia. And I got the idea to buy a couple old sci-fi movies from the 50s and put it up with the collection. And I really loved them. And more, I started wanting more of those posters, and I remember they were like $100 to $200 for a one sheet at the time, and we had a young family, and I kind of had to sneak around to get those. I didn't want to get in trouble with my wife, but I remember just getting hooked on those posters, and so really throughout the 80s I started collecting sci-fi posters, and then probably the breakthrough to horror was Ron Borst, his book, Graven Images. I saw that in the early 90s, and it's like, oh my goodness, because I'm from the Midwest, there weren't a lot of poster stores, that kind of thing around here. So when I read his book, it opened my eyes, and it's like, I always tell Ron he cost me a fortune.
So the films that interest you early on, when you moved into this house and had this basement, what were the titles of the posters that you first had up there?
Oh, I remember This Island Earth was one of my very first ones.
Like a one sheet or a three sheet?
These were one sheets I started out with. I didn't even know different sizes existed back then. So I got This Island Earth, When Worlds Collide. I think Godzilla was really early on in the sci-fi collecting, and then I started researching it. And at the time, eBay wasn't really around, but Movie Collectors World was around, and so I found out that posters were for sale through Movie Collectors World, and I started subscribing to that, and I'd get the magazine every month, and I'd look through it and look for new items and call on them. And back then, a lot of times, the day you got it, if you called, it might already be sold. There weren't a lot of sources to go to back then, and so I just started learning about 50s sci-fi posters, and it just kind of compounded itself.
I also remember, too, reading an article on you that were a huge fan of the Frank Capra Christmas film, It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, yeah. If you ask me what my favorite films are, they would be different than what people probably would think. Alien, probably my number one film. When I went to the movies and saw that in the movie theater, it's like, oh, my goodness, was that like an incredible, eye-opening movie, And number two is It's a Wonderful Life. I love that movie, and as a family, we try to watch it every winter.
So I read an article on you, too, where you said you started collecting in the 80s, and then you left the hobby in 1999, correct?
Yeah, we had a very expensive winter for our business, and I was running short on money, and as opposed to borrowing it, I decided I would sell some of the sci-fi posters. So I had a poster friend who connected me with Johnny Ramone from the Ramones, and he bought quite a few of the 50s posters, and then he had a good friend, Rob Zombie, and I remember Rob Zombie bought the rest of them. I saved a couple I pulled off to the side that I really wanted, but during the 2000 winter, 99 to 2000, I needed the money for our business and sold most things off.
So what were some of those posters you regretted selling to Johnny Ramone? Like I said, for those listeners out there, we're talking about the Johnny Ramone, the guitarist for the Ramones band. What were some of the posters you regretted selling him your first go-around in the hobby?
Well, I sold them. he was looking for a few holes, and I can't remember the specific titles he bought, but I had quite a few that he wanted the one-sheet on, and so he picked off some of those early posters that I bought, and then after he got most of the good ones, kind of Rob Zombie came in and mopped up and got the rest of them. So it was all the early one-sheets that I had acquired that went to both of them.
What do you remember most about? I mean, did you speak to Johnny over the phone? Did you ever go to his house and take a tour of his collection?
I spoke to him many times during that time period and later on, and I have one fond memory with him. He was getting, I don't know what year this was, but he was being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he was actually in Cleveland at that, and he got back and called me just to chit-chat, and he was really a nice guy, and what I remember strongly about him is he had very conservative political views.
Oh, wow.
It
wouldn't think that.
Surprised me because, the Ramones, but he was very conservative.
Yeah. And there was a YouTube video I think they were interviewing, because I think in the later years he didn't get along with his brother Joey.
Yes.
And there was an interview with him, and he just had this killer stone litho in the background of Dr. X and a full reissue set of Freaks lobby cards. What were some of the better posters in his collection?
Well, he did have, I remember the poster that intrigued me most at the time, and I was not into horror back then, but he had a Bride of Frankenstein half sheet, and that always caught my attention. But, he was a really good poster collector, and I did, when he passed away, Ron Moore represented a lot of his posters, and he did put one poster aside for me that I was able to pick up, and that's my House of Frankenstein insert.
Oh, wow.
And, so that stands out in my mind because it's interesting, he had actually specifically set aside the Bride of Frankenstein half sheet, but between the time that we first talked about it and the time he passed away, I acquired one. And so I didn't really need that. So Ron, being resourceful, lined me up with his House of Frankenstein. But I always thought it was an honor that he remembered me into the end and put something aside for me.
And so did Ron handle, when he passed away, unexpectedly very young, did Ron handle, we're talking about Ron Moore here, who's a big collector in Texas, did he handle the sale of most of Johnny's posters?
Yes, as best I remember, he had gone out before John, just before he passed away, and gone through things with him, and they drew up a game plan, and I believe he represented all the posters, although you'd probably have to ask him to find out exactly.
Okay. So let's jump in and now talk about Volume 1 of your 3-part book series, Children of the Night.
Sure.
How long did it take to plan and coordinate a project like this?
Oh, I would say that took 3 years.
Okay.
What happened is, I was, when I started buying back in 2000, I started buying back as soon as I possibly could. And when I started buying back in 2000, I saw the need, for a concise source to go to for posters. I remember as I was collecting, I was trying to collect Mummy's Hand, the lobby card set, and I could not find any complete lobby card set. I did not know, I knew what most of them looked like, but I did not know what the missing ones that I didn't have looked like. And so, as a consequence, that was like, wow, there's no place to go to find these things. And so I wanted to have a complete source for people to be able to find movie poster images, especially the horror images of Frankenstein, Dracula, because you could go, at that time, you could go online and find one here. Heritage might have a picture of two over here. E-movie poster, Bruce might have had one, but there was no source that put them all together in a logical way. And so I saw a need, and I really wanted to fill that need because I loved them. So I started accumulating images. I told my friends about it, and they would send me some images, and I started buying all the catalogs that posters were sold for. You know, if Christie's sold some, I whoever sold movie posters, I started collecting their catalogs, and my daughter would take the images and log them into the computer and scan them in, and she started collecting the images, and then I'd start organizing it, and I'd see, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. They've got 6 lobby cards. I wonder who the 2 are. So then I'd try to contact people and find the other images, and even some of the basic fundamental lobby card sets were not available, and some of the posters were not available at the time I did the first book, and nothing was organized where you could go to one source, So it took about 3 years. My daughter's in graphic design, and she was really, really good at it. But we had a learning process. We were taking some images that were horrible. And one or two of the images I published in the first book, people criticized. Well, what they didn't know was that was probably a Polaroid picture that somebody snapped of something years before and sent it to me. And we were starting from a really non-existent baseline to accumulate movie posters, especially these horror posters. So it was a labor of love. It took quite a few years, and I would say 3 years in the process for the first book.
And you mentioned the idea, I think in the introduction, was to make a low print run of the book and ensure other collectors were able to purchase it first, right?
Yes.
And
I had no idea of how many books to make, and so I think I did.
I heard the first edition was only limited to like 70 copies.
Yeah, I think it was 100, and I probably pulled 30 aside for my family and that kind of stuff. But I think I had 100 or something like that made, and then that went really well, and I had another, I think, 350 made, and they kept selling out, and so.
So there were two printings. There were 2 printings of Children of the Night.
There were actually 3 altogether, but the first 2 were the same book. And the one included a few different images and a few corrections, that kind of thing. And that was the one that we did 1,000 of in that time.
Yeah, it's smart because I think the first book, or at least the first 2 editions of the book, are now out of print, and they're going for like well over $100 on eBay, easy. So
yeah,
it's become kind of a collector's item in its own right.
Yeah, I had no idea, and the books all sold out. I saved a few for myself and my family, but basically that book sold out probably in 3 or 4 years, maybe.
So there's a beautiful 1925 one sheet in there that's folded from The Lost World.
Yes.
What's the story behind that one? Is that yours?
No, I wish it was.
Yeah.
I had been looking for unique items, and I found a book that was written on Lost World, and I can't even remember what book it was or who had it, but in there was the picture of the one sheet, and I said to myself, oh my goodness, nobody really has seen this. That people, maybe Ron Boyle or some of the old time collectors saw it years ago, but nobody in recent years had seen it. So that's the sort of thing I was looking for. I was looking for unique items.
Then there's a rare 1950s Frankenstein Boris Karloff standee, and it looks like it's in one of your frames. Is that yours?
I did have that for a while. Yes, that was mine.
What was the story behind that one?
It popped up on eBay.
Wow.
And I don't think anybody really knew what it was, And the funny thing I remember is that was like a 1/4 inch thick. It was very thick and very heavy. And after I bought it, when it came, it's like, man, I don't know how to put this in a frame, because I basically put them in frames and put them on my walls. I love these things. And so it was just kind of a fluke, and it popped up, and and I was able to get it. But I really loved that poster because it was a giant head of Frankenstein.
And then, of course, there was the blue 1933 The Invisible Man insert, which I believe is the only example that's been found.
Yes.
Do you still have that one? How did you acquire that piece?
Okay, I had heard about it at Cinevent. It was coming to Cinevent, and so I started planning for it and saving for it, and I don't know how kosher this is, but there was a dealer that was buying everything in sight at the time, and of horror posters, and sending them to someone in Europe. And I remember telling the guy, "Hey, I'll give you some money if you don't bid on this. Just leave this one alone," you know. And so I bought it at Cinevent, and it is the one and only Invisible Man insert that exists. I had it for many years, and when I bought my Invisible Man one sheet, I sold that to help pay for the one sheet.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. But it is weird how the Invisible Man seems one of the tougher Universal horror. It may be in terms of lobby cards at least, it may be the toughest campaign material to find for a film.
No, you're absolutely right. Invisible Man doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There are, when Universal Studios made these movies, they made a title card and 7 lobby cards. And for Invisible Man, the only thing I own is a title card and 5 lobby cards. So there's only 6 images that are exact for sure. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of times they put a lobby card set in the press book, okay? And in the case of Invisible Man, there's one image that's shown in the press book, kind of similar to the one sheet. He's got a test tube in his hand, and he's looking at it, and it reminds me of the one sheet. So my daughter Joelle made me a copy of that based on the press book, but to the best of my knowledge, nobody has that card, and I don't know that it really exists.
Okay, so you're saying there's possibly not an 8-piece lobby card set for the Invisible Man?
I would say there's not. Nobody, wow. There's no known one.
Wow.
And I've asked everybody, what does that image, that 8th card, what would that 8th card look like? And does the 7th card really exist? And amazingly, nobody knows.
Wow. So volume 2, they're already here, was your science fiction book. This was the one you wrote after Children of the Night. And this one deals exclusively with science fiction posters. Most of them are from the 50s. There's some 60s in there as well. Did this one take around 3 years to make also?
That one was quite a bit easier to make, okay. And I started making that, I think the first book was done in 2007, and I always intended to have a second book, and so I started making that when I was done with the first book, and I would say that took 2 years to put together. It wasn't as hard because it is primarily 50s, and more images were available for 50s, and it's later on, and the internet was more popular by then, and things were more available, but there was still no one source to go to that had everything in one place.
Yeah. There's this rare 3 sheet in there from the Man from Planet X that you never see. Do you own that one?
No. It's so funny, Andrew, that you mentioned the Man from Planet X, because that is by far my number one need still in science fiction. I would love to find either the British Quad, which is pictured in there. There's one out there someplace, and I think it's in Europe. I'd like to find that, the 3 sheet or the 6 sheet, and I just have not been able to. I have not been able to grab any of those, and that's about the only science fiction poster that I still really would like to have. I'd take anything I could get like everybody else, but for really wants, that's it. So
there was
the fact that you mentioned that one.
There was a prominent dealer at Cinevent, Steve Sally. I think he mentioned one time that he owned a 3-sheet from the Man from Planet X, or maybe he did and sold it a few years back. I can't remember.
No, you're right. Steve Sally is one of my hopes. You know, I kind of work people and the system trying to find these things once I know what I want. And Steve has promised me if he can ever find that poster that he'll sell it to me. But he does not know where it is. He says he's got a box of really rare posters that includes that. And I guess they have volumes of posters. I've asked people, now, is it possible Steve could not know where this poster is? And they say, oh yeah, it's definitely possible with their system. They have so many posters. And it's funny, Steve Sally's dad, he is the last person I know of that had, and we were talking about Invisible Man. Yeah. He's the last person I know that had an Invisible Man lobby card set. He told me he sold about 2.5 sets of that. So I said, what did it look like? What's this missing card? And he has no idea.
So he doesn't even know. He might have sold the 7-card set himself.
Yeah, I think he sold it himself a couple times. And, you know, they love posters, but I almost feel like it was a product to them as opposed to you and I who love these and collect them. But I'm probably characterizing that wrong, because I'm sure he has every bit as big a love as we do. He's done this his whole life. Yeah,
they're good people for sure. So your favorite 1950s science fiction poster? I know you got in The Day the Earth Stood Still 6-sheet, which is, you know, you don't see many 6-sheets from the 1950s. I don't think there's one for Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. I don't think there's one for Invasion of the Saucermen. But that 6-sheet for The Day the Earth Stood Still is just amazing. I mean, is that your favorite poster, science fiction poster from the 50s?
Yeah, I'm looking at it this very minute. I'm down in my basement where we're talking, and I'm looking at it, and oh boy, I tell you, it's my favorite. If I had to sell everything, that would be the last 50s science fiction poster that I would let go. And I have become a fan of 6-sheets. I think they're just wonderful images. They're large, but like everybody else, you can't display nearly as many 6-sheets. But I just love Day the Earth Stood Still. Invasion of the Saucermen 3-sheet is right behind that in terms of posters I love.
Yeah, and I like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman as well. That Invasion of the Saucermen artwork sold a few years back. The original artwork did. It was pretty incredible.
Oh, yeah. I think it went for quite a lot of money. And that giant cabbage head on Invasion of the Saucermen is just so much fun. And just about everybody I know just loves that image. It's one of those 50s movies that just make us laugh, you know, and the poster is probably better than the movie.
So your latest book, What Music They Make, this was the 3rd volume. Was it more challenging than the others? I mean, this book contains so many images. Did you ever think you wouldn't be able to fill all the pages?
Well, it's funny. It started out after I did Children of the Night. People started sending me images. They said, hey, you didn't have a picture of this in there. And I knew, you know, that you can only do so many images in a hardcover book, you know, and I knew that there were some holes that existed when I did Children of the Night. And so people started sending me images. I'd start finding new images. I bought thousands of dollars worth of catalogs looking for rare old images. And it started out, it was going to be a supplement. What Music They Made was going to be a supplement to Children of the Night. But the problem is, it's just kept growing and growing. And, you know, there were so many rare things that didn't exist. So, you know, like, for example, Metropolis. There's a set of the 1927 Metropolis lobby card set in the book. And I've had people tell me that nobody's probably seen that set in 50 years, you know. But what it is I'd get like 4 cards, and I'd be curious, what are the other cards, you know? And so I'd start sending emails to my friends. I'd start talking to people. And in the case of Metropolis, that came from all over the world. Several of those images came from Europe even. And I'd find somebody that had I'd say, do you have a Metropolis card? And they say, yeah, I have one. Or, yeah, I might have one, And I'd say, can you send me the image? And I'd see it and say, oh, no, that image exists. I know that. Or one would show up and it's like, oh, there's a new one, So slowly but surely, I was putting together the supplement, but it just kept getting larger and larger and larger. And I thought, this is going to be bigger than Children of the Night. If I want to do, I don't want to do another book. It's too hard. It's a lot of time. It's not really a money maker. It's you have to spend money up front even to have them made, But I thought, I need to do this book right. And so this book took a long time.
And I think you finally put the red style 1936 Walking Dead one sheet in the poster in the book, right?
It's in one of them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the Children Night or this one, but that was a rare poster as well too. You had that one for a while, right?
I did. I had that and traded it to somebody in California, and so yes, I did have it for a while, and I tried to since get it back, and he won't sell it or trade it back.
And then I think that there's a real, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. There's a real Frankenstein Wolfman 3-sheet in this book as well, too, a real one.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, I have that, and it's just a wonderful image. It's a giant image of the one sheet. All those posters are pretty similar from the insert on up, but to see it in a 3-sheet style is just fantastic, and I know there is one 6-sheet that a collector in New York owns, and then Carrie Haggard.
Wait, that was the one I was thinking of, not the 3-sheet, but and we'll get to that in a minute, Jim. But the 6-sheet, yeah, that was. Yeah, that's one we'll talk about in a minute. The other big ticket items in your collection, you mentioned briefly The Invisible Man, and I remember that poster being heavily advertised in practically every horror and science fiction magazine on newsstands at the time that it was coming to auction, including Famous Monsters. And as I mentioned, Invisible Man may be my favorite Universal horror film. Just the special effects at the time, and to this day, are pretty incredible. What was the story kind of behind that poster? Was that from the collection of Dennis Thomas?
No, it showed up in Profiles in History. So I know the owner. It's a private owner outside of New York, and because I had tried to buy it from him, and he wouldn't sell it, and I was disappointed that it showed up at an auction house when I tried to buy it from him. But it's rare. I think there's maybe 5 or 6 of those in existence.
Okay, and in terms of other posters in your collection that you have, may want to make mention of.
Well, I've kind of converted in my horror to lobby card sets, and I have virtually every Universal lobby card set, a full set.
The Mummy?
Right. Yes, I have a full set of The Mummy. I have a full set of Frankenstein, a full set of Dracula, a full set of Bride of Frankenstein. I don't want to sound braggarty because these are tough things and took forever to accumulate,
Of course.
And I have the 6 cards that are known of Invisible Man, and that's probably my toughest, my toughest images to acquire.
Plus the title card, right?
Yeah, I have the title card and the 5 images that are known to exist.
So where do you find most of your posters? Are you buying these from other collectors, through auctions? Do people call you because they know you're a big buyer of them?
It's kind of all of that, really. When I decided to work on lobby cards, I thought to myself, I am not a multimillionaire like some of these collectors, and I thought I can't have everything. So I have to limit myself. And so I would trade or sell. For example, I actually sold that Invisible Man 1-sheet, but it gave me the money I needed to acquire the
You mean the insert?
lobby cards.
Oh, you sold Oh, you sold the one sheet.
I sold the one sheet as well. Yes, it was too much money for me, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'd go buy it and I'd say that's my favorite poster, but then I'd look at it and say, what were you thinking when you paid that much money?
Yeah.
So I have a wonderful poster wife. She's really, really easy and good to work with and stuff, but that's the one poster that got me in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't see that. I guess that must have gone to another private collector, right?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
It went privately. And that's how you asked how I get these things. That's how, when I started going for the lobby cards, I just asked people, hey, what do you have on Frankenstein? And they'd tell me, and I'd say, what would it take to get that card? And they'd say, well, I'm missing this card on this set. And so I knew somebody that had that card, so I'd work out a sale or a trade for that card, and I gave it to the guy to get the card I needed on Frankenstein or whatever the title was.
So in writing all these books, 3 volumes, you did all this research, you talked to all these people, they sent you all these images. I mean, it had to be a pretty good networking opportunity, if anything, in writing these, because you now know where most of the major horror science fiction posters are, correct?
Yeah, that's so true. I'd say through writing the books, through other collectors, through one collector, I'd meet another collector. Like, for example, early on, the guy that was kind of my mentor was a man named Dennis Thomas in California. And he loved posters, and he was good friends with Ron Borst. And so through Dennis Thomas, I met Ron Borst. And through Dennis Thomas, I met Carrie Haggard, for example, and who I think is a whole nother story. But but I wanted to tell you, I was going to tell you the story of The Invisible Man.
Sure.
It was for sale at Profiles, and I talked to them and said, if by chance I get this, which I probably won't, I need time to sell things. And he said, I'll work with you, Jim, So I put in a minimum bid on that, and I really thought some of the big time, bigger money collectors would get it. And I remember the night that they had the sale, I got a call from Profiles, and it said, congratulations, you got the poster. And that was probably the biggest shock of my life, that I actually got that poster, And I looked over, and my wife was sitting on the other couch, and after I hung up, I said, honey, we got The Invisible Man, And she said, well, how much was it? And I told her the price minus any commissions or anything, and I'll never forget her comment. What were you thinking? and she was right. I was over my head in that. And so I had to sell a lot of the posters I had to get money for that. And that's when I sold the Invisible Man insert, was to get that poster. Now, I wish I had the insert, because I've since sold the one sheet, because it was just too much money. I couldn't look at that and feel good about it.
But you've got all the rare lobby cards.
So I used that, and I got the lobby cards. Nobody has the lobby cards that I have, and I'm really, I guess if there's anything I take pride in, those are it, I have a Werewolf of London one sheet that I don't know if it exists other than this one. Somebody had said there might be one other one, but I don't know. That's a great poster as well too. All right, so we'll change gears here, and I know you've graciously agreed to talk to us about this.
It's been about 10 years since this has all kind of happened, but take us back to 2008, 10 years ago, or maybe a few years before that. The Universal Horror Poster scam. For those of you out there who are listening don't know, in 2008, it was determined that a man in Georgia named Carrie Haggard scammed over 24 collectors on fake Universal Horror posters for approximately $1.4 million. This story ran all over the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, the Atlantic, you name it. They were in there covering this story. The first I heard about this, Jim, was when Stephen Fischler posted on one of the message board forums that he had won a title card, a Frankenstein title card from one of the major auction houses. and sent it to a restorer out west in Orange County named Carol Tincup because he had some suspicions about it. And she confirmed with him that it was likely a fake. And then, I don't know, I believe Heritage maybe have traced the card back to Carrie Haggard. You also wrote back in your book, Children of the Night, which came out in 2007, in the introduction, you and Carrie Haggard visited Ron Borst's house together to look at his world-renowned horror science fiction collection.
Correct.
And then you actually even went on to thank him in the acknowledgement section of Children of the Night. And then when you were profiled in March 2007, a Movie Collector's World, what was your first interaction with Carrie Haggard, and how'd you get to know him?
Carrie Haggard, the relationship goes back to the early, maybe around 2000, 2001. I was buying posters on the internet, through eBay at the time, and this guy named Original Horror Art would outbid me, or I'd barely outbid him, and we were bouncing back and forth, and I'm thinking, who is this guy? He's getting in my way here, and I could tell he loved posters. And through a mutual friend, Dennis Thomas, who I mentioned earlier, he actually knew us both, and he connected the two of us together. And we started becoming close friends in the early 2000s. And as a matter of fact, in 2003, I think it was, he and I flew out and met each other. I'd never met him before. We met in California, and we went and visited Dennis Thomas, and we saw his fantastic collection. He'd spent 2 years paying off a Frankenstein one-sheet, and he had that on his wall, and he had just wonderful posters. Well, Carrie and I were getting to know each other. We were traveling around California, and we were looking at some of the best collections in the world, including Ron Borst graciously allowed us to come to his house. And I told Ron at the time, that's the second thing he did that cost me a lot of money. The first was writing graven images, and the second was allowing me to see his wonderful collection, But on that weekend, or 3 days, we got to know each other, and we became closer friends. And so he had a love for these horror posters, and I had a love for these horror posters, and we talked every other day or so on the phone, and we really became good friends over a time period.
So did you guys have anything in common besides movie posters?
Well, we became friends, and over the years, we took some trips together. He and his wife came to our house 3 different times, for the weekend. They'd spend the weekend. They even went to church with us on Sunday. They became what I thought were good friends. And we even took a European trip together on a cruise and saw Europe together. And so we became good friends over that time period. And it's funny, Carrie, one of the good things about him is he was trying to accumulate images as well. And he and I would talk about, what images do you have? I remember he had taken a notebook and pasted in all these pictures of things, and he was one of the motivations I had for doing the book. I saw his pages, and they were all flopping around and no system to it, and but we became really, really good friends.
I know you're a devout Christian man.
Well,
I had heard that from another collector. Did he convert to Christianity while you got to know him?
Yeah, I'd given him a book on it, and his wife read this devotional book, and he had accepted Christ as a Savior, according to him, and become a Christian during that time period.
Did you have any suspicions, because you said you had actually met him in 2000, and a lot of this didn't come to light until 8 years later. Did you have any doubt at the time you met him that something like this may have been going on?
Oh, no. I really trusted him. I thought we were good friends, and, I let my guard down trusting him. And what happened is, I think it was in early 2007, he got 2/3 of a Frankenstein meets the Wolfman 6-sheet, and he needed the bottom portion of that.
Jim, we'll get to that in a second. I want to ask you about that in just a moment.
Sure.
But I also remember, too, that around this time, prior to you being featured in Showcase, I remember actually there was this columnist in the later issues of Movie Collector's World by the name of Freddie Poe. And he used to write about Showcase collections. And prior to you being featured, they profiled what's dubbed the Carrie Haggard collection.
Correct.
And I can't remember the exact date, but it was prior to all of this coming out. Do you think do you think at the time he was using this publication in order to gain credibility so he could initiate trades with other collectors?
Well, he loved the hobby. There's no doubt about it. He loved posters. And when he turned sinister, I can't exactly say. I can take it back to a poster that gave him the ideas, but I think he was genuine in his love at the time for posters, but his love was more than he could afford, and his greed got the best of him.
Okay, so we'll ask you about that in a minute. Let me ask you this. If I recall, in that article, A Movie Collector's World, there was a reissue 1947 Frankenstein one-sheet hanging on one of his walls, which turned out to be one of the forgeries that I believe went through profiles in history, correct?
Yeah. Well, actually, the picture you saw on his walls was my R47 Frankenstein that was real.
Okay.
Now, what he did was he'd get that poster, and maybe I'm getting ahead of the story you want to tell here, but then he'd go to New York and make really good copies of it. He'd buy old one-sheets, and he'd sand off the image, and then he took them to California and had the image put on, and he'd make very, very sophisticated fakes.
Okay.
And I think the one you're talking about was actually a real one.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. You just suspect that everything he has is fake, but we'll get into that in a second. Not everything was. A lot of it was. There was another poster that I think was referred to in one of the lawsuits as an insert, but it was actually a one-sheet. The 1934 Style D Bela Lugosi Black Cat one-sheet.
Correct.
You when you dealt with Haggard on all this, where did he tell you he was getting such one-of-a-kind posters? Did he have a source? I remember one of the lawsuits outlined him referring to a group of 3 old-time collectors. What did he mean by that?
Well, he had told me every fake and every poster that he did, he had a long story on them, and he'd start working them maybe as much as a year ahead of time. And his story was that he'd gone out to California, and through somebody that I will not mention because the guy's still around, and they still may be friends even, but he said he met 3 old-time collectors, and these guys did not really know values. They were older, and they weren't sophisticated with the internet, and he would be buying lobby cards through these collectors and posters. And, for example, the Black Cat, he told me that one of the guys went in to see a movie in the movie theater. I think it was an Indiana Jones movie. And when he got out, he asked the owner of the theater if he could get the one-sheet when he was done with that. And the owner told him, well, I've got some older one-sheets, too, you might be interested in if you like that. And,
wow.
Yeah, he made up these sophisticated long-term stuff. So the first time I hear about it, he said, gee, I might have a lead on a Black Cat one-sheet, and then I'm going to 2 months, he'd say, I'm going to go back out there, and I think I'll try to see this guy and see if he does have that. And then 2 months later, he'd email saying, gee, I just met this guy. He does have some great stuff, and he would work this story for a year. It was very convincing how he did this.
I imagine.
And of course,
good.
And finding out, like Black Cat, for example, he went to Jaime's, and one of the workers there, after everything came out, told me they made 2 fake Black Cat one-sheets. And it was very, very convincing. Nobody would have known, really.
Mm-hmm. So looking back, you did a lot of deals with them. Were most of these in person or over the phone? Or email?
Yeah. he and I would start talking about deals. You know, he'd say, wow, his story was, you know how I got that Dracula card from you in a trade last year? I think I can get one back from one of the guys that I know. Would you be interested in that card? You know, and so we'd start talking deals on the phone, and we did, as best that I can remember when I wrote down for the FBI, we did 16 trades that involved. You know, I basically gave him around 40 posters and lobby cards that were real, and he would come here. He and his wife would come for the weekend, and we would do trades like you did baseball cards. You know,
so wait, they would come up to your house in Michigan?
Yeah, they'd fly up here, and we'd spend time together. We flew to their house one time and met them at their house. And,
do you think that she knew what he was doing, or she thought that he was just, this is what stuff he found? You know, do you think she was in on it?
This is an opinion. My opinion is absolutely she knew, but it's just an opinion. You know, I never proved it in court. They did so many legal finagling things. They split up when everything came down. They took all the equity out of their house. They filed for bankruptcy illegally. They split up. She went out to Arizona. They did everything they could to prevent people from going after them. And I really believe she knew, because she came and picked one insert off our wall. Carrie, I really want this right here, you know, and
so you think that they maybe, before they came over to her house, they maybe talked about which poster was of high value that you owned, that maybe would seem like, you know, he wouldn't point to it because it'd be too obvious himself, but you would have her go pick it out.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what happened. You know, I can still see it right now. I know where the poster was hanging on my wall, and her saying, Kiri, can you get me this poster? I really would like this poster, you know. And that poster is still out there someplace. It has not been confiscated ever.
And which poster was that?
Oh, gee, let me think about it for a second.
Okay.
It was a silent horror, Universal silent horror. It's not coming to me as we talk, but I'll think of it. But anyway,
was there anything he said to you? Was there anything he said to you over this time? Looking back, you know, this happened. I said, you know, you mentioned about 6, 7, 8 years. 8 years before all this came out. Was there anything besides what you just mentioned about, you know, pointing to posters on the walls after you invited him to your house that gives you reason to believe he was somehow scamming you?
No, at the time we did the deals where he scammed me and the rest of the hobby, and it's actually 30-some people, organizations, and collectors, you know, but the deals that he did, we did from 2007 through early 2009, and I never suspected him. I trusted him, and nobody else did either. But what happened is he got greedy, and he'd start making when he got a good card from me, he'd come here and he'd trade me some things, and he'd get a good card, and he'd make 3 or 4 of those in New York, and in California. They'd work together. They'd make this card, and they started sending them to different places. He got greedy. If he would have just done 1 or 2, nobody would have known. So send one to Michigan, send one to Europe, send one to California. But he got greedy and started duplicating the cards.
So you had, at this point, had you mostly, let's back up for a second. So at the time you found out about all this, what tipped you off? I had mentioned Stephen Fischler coming on the message board forums. When did you realize what had all happened? I mean, when was your first suspicions of...
Yeah, it's funny. When you said we were going to talk about this, I looked back, and in late February of 2009, I sent Carrie an email saying, Carrie, I'm starting to get worried about something. I've gotten a card from you, and other people have gotten the same card. I said, how can 2 people get the same rare, let's say, old Dark House card from you? How is that possible? And I remember he called me on the phone immediately after he got that and said, well, you know, Jim, there's 3 guys out there, and they have some duplicates, and I'm not about to turn down a duplicate. If I can get these cards, I'm taking them. And so yeah, there's been a few duplicates, but it's because of these three guys, you know.
So this is
And
early
so I started
2009.
worrying about
This was early
Yeah.
2009. There were some old Dark House lobby cards you had suspicions of because you had been dealt them from Kerry, and you had heard other collectors had been dealt those same cards from him.
I'll never forget. By the way, that was a Phantom of the Opera insert that I was
Okay.
trying to think of.
Okay.
The original Phantom
Great
of the
poster.
Opera. But I wish I had it.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is I got a call from a legitimate dealer in California, and he said, I have these three lobby cards for sale. And he told me the three cards. One of them was an old Dark House. I think one of them was a Frankenstein card, and one of them was a Black Cat card. If I remember correctly, those are the three titles. And I said, well, which image of the 8 do you have? And he'd tell me, and I'm thinking, I got that one from Kerry Haggard. Then he'd tell me another one. I thought, gee, I got that from Kerry Haggard a year ago. And so what it turned out is all three of these images were lobby cards that I'd gotten from Kerry Haggard. So I said to him, well, where did you get these, cards? And he said, from Kerry Haggard. And when he said from Kerry Haggard, my heart dropped. I thought, oh my gosh. So then I started looking at my cards, and I called one of the top people in our hobby and said, listen, I'm worried about something. There's some duplicates out there. I've got these three cards. And he said, well, send them to me. I'll look them over for you. And so he looked them over, and by then this was like June of 2009, and he sent me an email, or he may have even called me and said, gee, I'm suspicious of these cards. And I said, what? And I said, yeah, something doesn't seem right about them. And it's the first time that, anybody in the mainstream had taken a look at things. And it was kind of happening at the same time with a couple other people. Ron McGidd, a collector in California, had some problems, and he was starting to worry. And then you mentioned Stephen Fisher. That was a Dracula window card that he'd gotten.
Okay.
And so it's just now starting to dawn on me. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And so I basically took everything I got from Kerry Haggard. I took them off the walls, and I sent them to a couple of the restorers, and I know one card was a Dracula fake lobby card, and Heritage, Gray Smith, had sent it to Jaime to take a look at, and Jaime said, oh no, it's okay, it's not a problem. He sent it back to Gray, and Gray said, no, I think there's a problem here. And then after sending it a second time, Jaime said, oh, there may be a problem. Well, Jaime was the guy that was working with Kerry Haggard making these things.
We'll get there in just a second. Let me ask you this. I had heard you mention Ron Magid. At the same time you were being conned, I did read an article in the Los Angeles Times that he was being conned as well by Haggard.
Yeah.
Apparently $150,000 worth of posters that he had exchanged in trade for 9 posters of Kerry Haggard's turned out to be forgeries as well. I think so. We're in June now, or the summer of 2009. When was the lawsuit filed by you? You filed a lawsuit was October for $852,400 in damages.
Is
for
that
trades,
what it was? I'll take your word for it.
For trades and cash payments with Haggard. Up to this point, had you done mostly trades with him or paid in cash?
Well, I had done 16 trades that involved about 40 of my posters, and then I would give him, like, if he was giving me something that was worth $5,000 more, I would offset that with $5,000. I'd give him 2 lobby cards for this and $5,000. And so I'd given him quite a bit of cash, money orders, PayPal, money to him. And so I gave him, and looking at the numbers, I gave him $436,000 worth of legitimate posters. And see, he'd take those and he'd make copies and sell them to other people. And in fact, he'd tell me, hey, you know how you sold me a Frankenstein title card 2 years ago. Well, I just got one back, and he'd send me a picture when he was in California holding a kind of a raggedy Son of Frankenstein title card, and said, I'm going to Jaime's, we'll work on this, and I can get it to you for a pretty reasonable price. So he took my originals, made copies, and sold them all around the world, including back to me.
Okay, so how are the fakes made and detected? There's two people I want to ask you about, and I'm no problem mentioning their names here. Jaime Mendez, who you initially was a restorer, for listeners who don't know, out in California. He's been working on movie posters for several decades. Very talented, but he and Carrie, that is where Carrie Haggard had the reproductions worked on, I should say. There was also a gentleman in New York by the name of Anthony who was referred to in your lawsuit as well.
Right.
Did you and Carrie Haggard ever visit Jaime Mendez's shop together?
Yeah, we did originally back in 2003. We got to know him because we were both sending things to him. And he showed us around, seemed very cordial, very nice. And we just kind of built our relationship with him at the time. And so when Carrie started making fakes, what he'd do is he'd take, let's say a Bride of Frankenstein lobby card, okay? He'd take a real one, and he took it out to that man you referred to, Anthony, who had a very high-test printing company in New York. And the way he had met him was through Todd Firetag, who helped him make copies of the bottom of his Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman 6-sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And when they
unknowingly, just did it as a favor, right? As another collector to collector.
Yeah, it was not anything
sinister about
evil
it all.
about it. It was a business transaction. Todd charged Carrie for the bottom part to complete his 6-sheet, But Carrie met this Anthony, who really was also innocent of things, as it turned out. I wasn't sure at first, but so he would take and make, let's say, 3 really good images in New York, and then he'd buy old lobby cards, and he actually sanded the images off the lobby cards. And then he took them to Jaime in California, and Jaime would seal the image to the lobby card, and then they would coat it with something that prohibits new dot matrix printing. You can see little dots if you look, real closely. Well,
for an inkjet printer, right?
Yeah.
That's not the way old posters were made. We're talking about how Anthony printed them, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. They were printed with dot matrix, and they were really good looking, But then, if you looked under at them with a magnifying glass, Carrie and Jaime had covered the lobby card with some kind of protectant or some kind of sealant that blended everything together, and you really could not, if you didn't know, you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at them. And so it was really a sophisticated process. And so Carrie paid Jaime cash for that. The way I found out all the details about this is originally we had sued Jaime too when all this came to be, and Jaime agreed to come to court here in Michigan and tell the truth about things, which he did.
Was that before or after you agreed to drop the lawsuit?
I agreed to drop the lawsuit if he'd come out and tell the truth.
But he wouldn't come out there if the lawsuit wasn't dropped.
Right, he would not come out.
Okay.
He had an attorney he was working with and stuff. And so he came out here, and that's how I learned about the whole process. Is a court in Detroit here. Is I learned what they were doing. It's the first time I became completely aware of things. And of course, my attorney, after he left, said, "Let's sue him again." He said we didn't agree not to sue him again, but I didn't want to go that route. You know what I mean? So I used our agreement to find out the true details, and Jaime admitted to making everything. He was very casual about it. Yes, I made that. Yes, I made that. Yes, I made that. And as it turned out, I know I never got one, but a Wolfman title card, they made 6 fake ones. And so I said to Jaime, how is it possible, if you didn't know that he was selling these for profits, how is it possible you made 6 Wolfman title cards? Well, Carrie didn't like how the first one turned out. He wanted it a little darker. he told me he was going to take these and put them in a frame and put them on his wall, and this was for his sake, and he was going to sell off or put the real ones away. And so, I'm very suspicious of I-Me.
Okay, so you found out that Carey's making these forged reproductions, but there's multiple Raven title cards. There's a reproduction for 1947's reissue of Dracula. There were multiple Frankenstein title cards. Where was he being supplied the images from?
Well, he would buy the real thing from collectors and people like myself. I might trade him. I did trade him an R47 Dracula one sheet, for example. So he would have the real thing, and he would take it to New York and make however many images he made. I don't even know, and then take them out to California and have them made. So he would get real posters from different collectors, including Ron McGidd, you had mentioned, and myself, and some people didn't even want their name out there, and I don't blame them, their organizations or people who didn't want to be associated with it, but people gave him real things, and he, in turn, made fakes from those real items.
I actually remember speaking with that restoration company, Jaime's Restoration Company out in California, and the restoration has gotten so good nowadays, most of these restorers do have access to a large flatbed scanner, and they can actually recreate missing sections of the poster now themselves. So if you got like a Wizard of Oz insert and the bottom third is missing, if you can find another section of that poster, they'll make a copy of it, and then they basically put what's remaining behind the poster. Then they can trace on graph paper and draw down and print it out and actually replace the entire missing sections of the poster.
If a poster or lobby card is represented properly, hey, this was all real, this corner section was missing, and we put it in, I don't really have a problem with that. If they're repairing it and they're represented properly, so the value based on how much repair is. But the problem we had was Carey was making completely fake images.
Mm-hmm. So I also remember his eBay user ID being Universal Horror Art. And what he would do is he would take posters and lobby cards and basically lie them down on this wooden chest, and then he would photograph them. And then around the room you could see various other horror posters hanging on the wall. He actually have an email from him right around that time when he was offering me a few cards from Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh, yeah.
And looking back, I'm pretty glad I passed on those. So the FBI, after you filed the lawsuit, because a lot of these posters had gone through the mail, they decided to take the case, right?
Well, it's funny. I thought that would be an easy, no-brainer thing, but it actually was some work getting somebody to go after him. I started with my local sheriff here, and he said, we're a political organization. We don't have the funds to go down to Georgia. He said, why don't you go down to Georgia, to Commerce, Georgia, which is where he was from. And so my attorney and I flew down to Commerce, Georgia, and talked to their police department, and they were familiar with Carey Haggard and Tiffany Haggard, by the way, but they really, I could tell that was not going anywhere. So I contacted the FBI here in Detroit, and at the same time, Profiles in History contacted the FBI. He had a connection in New York, and so we both made connections with the FBI, and they both kind of saw the value in going after that, and we put the two departments together, and New York decided that that would be the place to go after him because Bernie Madoff had stolen all the money, and people in New York were very receptive to going after criminals like this. And so, the New York agent Mike decided to take it, and he and I worked very closely together for a couple years, and I have nothing but respect for the FBI and what they did. They held him accountable. Ultimately, they did a sting, and they caught him trying to sell more fakes, and And we went to, they worked out a plea agreement, and he got a 68-month jail sentence on this.
So that's roughly, 6 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And was there any
court,
was there any
to serve 85% of that?
Okay. Was there any concern throughout all this about him hiding or trying to move some of the authentic posters he had from trades from other collectors? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. They were able to confiscate a lot of the posters, a lot of the real things, and they also confiscated half posters, fake posters, posters on their way to being made real. They got the whole thing, but they only got about I'm going to say 60%. It's a guess, really, about 60% of the real items. And Kerry Haggard still has some real items, and he may still have some fakes too. Since this all happened, some fakes have shown up, but I want to relieve anybody's fears. Mostly everything fake was taken out of circulation. Could he resubmit some? He's out of prison now. The 68 months are up. He's out of prison. He's got things. What he has, I don't know. I know some of the real items that he still has, but fake items, I have no idea. But pretty much they're not in circulation anymore, and people can be relieved to know that.
Were there any posters in your first book, Children of the Night, that were forged reproductions?
I would say most definitely. I would say I would have to really figure it out, but definitely some of those were from him.
Okay. And during this time, did you obviously had stuff from Haggard in your collection that was forged. I mean, did you inadvertently trade or,
yes,
deal the stuff to other collectors?
Yes, I had no idea that I had some fakes, and I sold them or traded them to other collectors. And what happened is when I realized what was going on, I made a list of everything, and I had to go back and make it right with many collectors, because I'd call them up and say, and I remember a couple of them got really mad at me. I'd say, hey, I suspect that this is a fake. We need to get it checked out, and sure enough, some would be. But I had to not only did I lose a major part of my collection, but I also had to spend money out of my pocket to reimburse the different people that I'd sold or traded things to. It was a very painful experience.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of some of the more, over the last, I'd say 2 or 3 years, some of the confiscated forged movie memorabilia that's been authenticated has actually come to auction. And I think there's currently an auction going on right now in Texas. How many more will we see? I mean, are there many more auctions we're going to see in the future?
This is the last one of items that the FBI confiscated. These are good items that they've authenticated, and I look at them and say, yeah, that used to be mine. Yeah, that used to be mine, But these are good items, and it's really a good buying opportunity for people, because the marshal's office isn't charging any commission, and all sales go back to the 30-some victims that they have on their list. And so they prorate the sales and give them back. But last summer, I think it was in July, they had the first sale, and people got some really good buying opportunities there at some real reasonable prices. And October 16th of 2018 here, this year, will be the last sale of good items.
So they're being sold out of Texas. Why do they like to go to that particular auction house as opposed to one of the other major two?
Yeah, I wish I could have influenced that, but it's beyond my influence. And what it is this is an auction house that the U.S. Marshal's office works with, and they lined this up.
Okay. So how do the proceeds work? I mean, obviously you've taken the biggest sting. I mean, and you're probably bidding on stuff again in the auction, even though it's your stuff anyways.
I am.
How do you, have you been fully compensated for all this?
I will never be fully compensated. No, there's just no way I'll never get anywhere near the money back. But what happened is, if I steal something from you and the FBI confiscates it, and you can prove it was yours, you get it back, okay? So the problem is, most of these lobby cards that are real, not most of them, but a large percentage of them came from me. But the problem is, there's no serial number on it. I didn't have a stamp on it. There's no way I could prove that those were my items. So we negotiated a deal where the FBI gave me 11 items that I wanted back, okay, that they knew. It was a process, let's say. But I got 11 items back over a course of a couple years. Probably the beginning of this year was the last batch of them that came back. So I got 11 items back. So I got compensated somewhat that way. And then from the first sale, they prorated any of the sales to all 30-some victims, and they subtracted, what I got back out of my values. And I still got a check for some of it, and I suspect that a year from now, it'll probably take more than a year from now, I'll get another, not a large check, but another check back. And, overall, I'm very satisfied. I'll never get reimbursed. But,
how much do you think you've spent on legal fees?
I spent $100,000.
Wow.
But
and it took 3 years. It took 3 years to sentence him, right? So I wonder why all this was strung out so long, which ultimately costs you more money.
Well, Kerry Haggard had done everything he could. First of all, he and his wife split up. So we had to go out to Arizona to go after his wife, who denied knowing anything about posters whatsoever, okay? And then he filed for bankruptcy, and we had to go down to Georgia and prove, and which we did do, and had his bankruptcy case thrown out that he wasn't bankrupt, that he had value in Ford memorabilia, which, by the way, he cheated people about $1 million worth, according to the FBI, out of Ford memorabilia as well.
Mm-hmm.
But we had to prove that he wasn't bankrupt. And
wait, the Ford memorabilia was going on at the same time that you were being scammed, or was that years earlier?
It was earlier.
That's
Ford,
yeah.
Yeah. He'd been through the Ford system with clocks and signs, and he made those things up too. And when he got out of prison, the FBI called me up and said, "Listen, we can't watch him. You can keep your eye open, because he's going to do it again." And
jeez.
I know what posters he's got. He's got some good posters, and I'm just waiting until they become available, and then I'm going to say, "Where did that poster come from? Why are you selling?" You know what I mean?
So the Phantom of the Opera, the silent film, that's one you think he still has or is in possession of?
He still has that. Absolutely, he still has that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got things like he has a Wolfman insert, and he bought that legitimately from Heritage. Well, they didn't confiscate that, but really that value came from, he bought that with money he stole from the collectors in the hobby.
Yeah, I know. So it's not legitimate money. And then he also used you as a vehicle to push his stuff to other collectors when it was him that's making the forgeries, to make him kind of look like his hands were washed clean, which is...
I think you're right. I think I added legitimacy to him because he could say, "Hey, Jim Gresham's my friend," or whatever. And so he definitely used me. I was the biggest fool and the biggest victim of all. He told me that after it all came down. He called me up and said, "Yeah, I really got you." He said, "My grandson is going to be rich beyond compare."
Wait, he called you on the phone after he got out of prison and told you that?
Yeah. No, he called me before he went into prison.
Wow. Wow.
He rubbed it in, because I told him when all this was coming down, "Kerry, make things right. You got to do what's right here. Straighten things out. You've goofed up, but give me back my stuff." I didn't even know all these other people had been involved at that point, and so I said, "Make it right." And
He just couldn't. Yeah. So looking back at all this, you'd mentioned Ford memorabilia. Looking back on all this, do you think he even cared about posters at all, or was just some type of premeditated master plan to get involved, build some kind of legitimacy, and deceive people and get away with the money before getting caught?
I really believe he loved these things. I really do. And I think he loved Ford memorabilia as well. He's got, of course, when we went after him, they were his mother's, but he's got Ford cars. He's got Ford signs. He's got a lot of the same stuff that he sold, but his are the legitimate ones. And I think it started out, and at one point he made a copy of that bottom portion of the 6th sheet of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and something in the light went on in his head, say, gee, I could do this, and and so he started trying to greatly increase his collection by cheating everybody.
I'm not a psychologist, of course, by any means, but it seems to me like if this was all about acquiring more posters, and there's obviously greed that gets involved of trying to build one's collection more and more, it takes certain finances and means to be able to spend tens and even in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars on a movie poster. And, if the finances aren't there, you can't feed the beast, the obsession. So There's this weird insecurity type stuff. It seems like it's going on that causes people to do all sorts of bad and crazy stuff, including crimes where they hurt other people. Well,
I'm a Christian. I've made that very clear. And I know that we all have a sinful nature, and he just let the sinful nature get the better of him, and he wanted to excel in the hobby and get more things, and he used any means possible to do that, whereas you and I have consciences and say, no, that's not the right thing to do. I would never do that. But he didn't have that conscience.
So having gone through all this and looking back, do you think that there's any one thing you could have done to prevent this from happening? I mean, is there a foolproof way of authenticating movie posters and lobby cards?
Well, if there's anything suspicious, people should send them to an expert to have them looked at. Okay, I know what to look for. For example, if you take a lobby card, if you scrape the tan border, the fake ones have white paper underneath there. It almost looks like the borders were replaced, but that goes across the whole card. So underneath the coloring is white, and also knowing now what I know, the lobby cards are a little thicker, And,
the reproductions were thicker, slightly thicker?
Yeah, a touch thicker in the middle part of it. You can tell, but you couldn't tell that then. It just looked like something that got repaired. Heck, they made a 6-sheet. They made a fake 6-sheet. When Jaime was here, he said, yes, I made, because I started worrying about it because Carrie had my Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein 6-sheet, which, by the way, I got back the real one of. But I said to Jaime, when he was on the stand, did you make this poster? He said, yes, I did. Mm-hmm. He made a 6-sheet, a fake 6-sheet.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
How much work, if Carrie Haggard would have applied half this effort to a legitimate business,
he could have had the posters that he wanted.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. How much work did they do, But, yeah, I mean,
most people,
honestly, I like to assume people are honest and true. I thought we were friends, and he got me. There's no doubt about it. He was right when he said he got me, but he got everybody else in the hobby. There's a couple people that didn't get hit, and they've since said to me, oh, I would have known, but Andrew, they would not have known.
I know. Would not have. And most people that went through what you went through, they would take a break from the hobby, but you actually jumped 2 feet back in. I remember hearing a story about 2 very expensive comics owned by actor Nicolas Cage being stolen off the wall in his home in California. And this was at a party one night. He just had 2 copies of a copy of Action 1 and Detective Comics 27 just in frames on his wall, and there was a big party, and they got stolen, and it bothered him so much that he ended up selling his entire collection, which was valued at millions, through Heritage. He didn't want to deal with comic books anymore, but you still seem to be enjoying collecting and have kind of moved on from it.
Yeah, I had to think twice. It knocked me down, but I was still young enough that I could. That was basically my decision, was put money into posters for my retirement as opposed to having it sit in the bank, because I like posters and I'd rather look at the beauty of posters and enjoy it. I've loved the movies, and so I really did have to think long and hard about it. But I decided I'm not going to let him take the joy out of this hobby, and I haven't. I've moved on mentally, and he served his time, and I'm enjoying these books. What music they make. I'm really happy that I was able to make these, because I think for the rest of history, lobby cards and posters are categorized that might not have ever been put together again. They've just drifted apart. Most Dangerous Game lobby card set. That was really hard to assemble. Murders in the Zoo. Impossible. Nobody could put these things together now, I think. But now that they're together in these two books, they'll go down in history as, if anybody wants to refer to Universal movie posters or horror posters from the 30s and 40s, they'll have a reference source to go to.
Now, in terms of posters you're looking for, you mentioned that 8th card for Invisible Man, if it exists. But I remember you running these ads in Movie Collectors World looking for Real Art Universal lobby cards back in the day. What else is out there tough you're looking to find?
Boy, we talked about the one science fiction is The Man from Planet X. I would like just a large piece of paper on that, 6-sheet, 3-sheet, or British quad. I need some old Dark House cards. I don't have that. That's the only Universal horror set that I don't have put together. I don't know if Invisible Man exists or not. If by chance those pop up, I would love to get those. I'm sure one Most Dangerous Game card. It's just like here and there. There's things that will always keep me interested. My peak buying days are probably long over with, but. I've got the Universal horror sets. I've got the Real Art sets on Frankenstein, Dracula, Mummy, all those sort of things. So I'm very blessed, and I'm very thankful for what I do have.
Well, you can, for listeners, you can find Jim and his book on his website, whatmusictheymake.com, or he's also selling them on eBay under Greshplow, his eBay user ID. And What Music They Make's also available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today's show here on News and Movies Radio. You can check out all of our latest interviews and movie reviews by subscribing through email at newsandmoviesradio.com or by clicking the subscribe button on our News and Movies Radio Podomatic, YouTube, or Apple iTunes Store pages. We are 100% listener-funded radio. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider making a donation through our Patreon page at patreon.com/News and Movies Radio. We'll be back in the coming weeks with more interviews and stories from pop culture collectors, dealers, and enthusiasts alike. Thanks so much, Jim, for being on the show. Thanks for your time.
Thank you also, Andrew.
All right.
Have a great day.
Bye.